The night I knocked on a stranger's door and called her my girlfriend. I had no plan, no context, and no idea who the man standing inside her apartment actually was. All I knew was that she was backed against her own kitchen counter keys in her hand, and the space between her and the door was completely blocked. She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Sorry, babe, lost track of time." I had never spoken to this woman in my life. I said, "No worries, honey." And just like that, we were apparently together. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Caleb Roman. I'm 28 years old. I fix things for a living, pipes, wiring, busted drywall, whatever people need. And I've lived in apartment 4A of the Greystone building on West Addison Street in Chicago for going on 2 years. It's not a glamorous building. The boiler runs loud in January, the elevator takes its sweet time, and the hallway carpet on the 4th floor has a stain near the stairwell that's been there since before I moved in. But the rent is reasonable, the walls are thick enough that I can't hear my neighbor's TV, and the woman in 4B makes coffee at 3 in the afternoon like clockwork, which I know because the smell drifts under the gap of my front door every single day. I knew her name was Nadia Cross, the way you know things about people you live 12 feet away from but have never actually sat down with. Her name was on her packages, which got delivered to my door 3 times because the building's delivery system had a grudge against accuracy. I knew she worked night shifts at a children's hospital because her lights went off at 7 in the morning and came back on around 3 in the afternoon. I knew she took her coffee black, no sugar because of those same misdirected packages. I told myself none of that meant anything. I was just observant. It's a professional habit. That Thursday night, I was on my back in the hallway outside 4A and 4B replacing a section of corroded pipe that ran under the baseboard. It was 11 at night, which was not my preferred work hour, but Donna Perez, the building manager, had called me that morning with the specific tone she used when something was about to flood and she needed it fixed before it actually flooded. I had my tools spread across the hallway floor, a flashlight clenched between my teeth, and the kind of focused quiet that comes from doing a job you've done 100 times. That was when I heard the voices from 4B. At first it was just a low murmur, the kind that bleeds through an old door and sounds like nothing. Then it sharpened. A man's voice, calm in a way that felt calculated, the kind of calm that isn't actually calm at all. It's control wearing a costume. I caught fragments. "You're overreacting, Nadia. I just want you to think about what you're doing here. This is family. You don't bring strangers into family business." I set my wrench down without meaning to. I sat up. The flashlight was still in my mouth, and I pulled it out and held it in my hand, not moving. I told myself it wasn't my business. People argue. Brothers argue with sisters, husbands argue with wives, roommates argue about dishes. I had no idea who was in that apartment or what they were fighting about. It wasn't my place. I stayed exactly where I was for 19 minutes. I know because I checked my phone twice and watched the numbers change. What moved me finally wasn't the volume. It was the absence of it. Nadia's voice had been tight and clipped, pushing back word by word. And then it stopped. Completely. The man kept talking smoother now, like he'd won something, and she had gone completely quiet in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. I grew up watching my father go quiet like that. I knew what that kind of silence cost a person. I stood up, walked 3 steps to the door of 4B and knocked. There was a pause. Then footsteps. Then the door opened, and I saw her for the first time with more than peripheral attention. Nadia Cross was 5'4" in her socked feet, wearing scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a knot that had mostly come loose. Her eyes were dry. They were so deliberately dry that the effort of keeping them that way was written all over the tension in her jaw. Behind her, standing in the middle of her kitchen like he owned it, was a man in his mid-30s. Business casual. Good watch. The specific posture of someone who had never once in his life been told no by anyone who mattered. "Honey," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I've been waiting. You said you'd be done by 10. Nadia Cross looked at me. Her eyes moved fast, top to bottom, then straight to my face, and I watched her do the math in under 2 seconds. Then something in her expression shifted, and she said, "Sorry, babe, I completely lost track of time." She stepped back and let me walk in. The man's jaw tightened. He looked me over the way people look at something they're deciding whether to address or dismiss. "Didn't know you had company, Nadia," he said, and the word company landed somewhere between an accusation and a warning. "She mentioned she was expecting someone." I kept my voice easy, my hands loose at my sides. I had left my tools in the hallway. I was aware of that. Guess the time got away from her. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Nadia. She met his eyes and held them without flinching, and whatever he was looking for, he didn't find it. "We'll talk later," he said. "Sure," Nadia said. "Call first." He left. Nadia waited until she heard the stairwell door at the end of the hall click shut before she let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for the better part of an hour. Her hands were trembling barely just the faintest shake at her fingertips, and she pressed them flat against the front of her scrubs. Then she turned and looked at me standing in the middle of her kitchen, still wearing my work jacket with drywall dust on the sleeve, and she said with a steadiness that almost knocked me sideways, "I don't even know your name." "Caleb," I said. "4A. She nodded once like that was enough for now. "Nadia, 4B. "I know," I said. "Your packages keep ending up at my door." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite a wince. Something in between. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked at the closed front door, then back at me, and the shakiness in her hands had not stopped. "Caleb from 4A, she said. "Do you want coffee, or are we just going to stand here being strangers who are apparently dating?" Her kitchen was small, the way Chicago apartment kitchens always are. Just enough counter space to make coffee without knocking anything over if you were deliberate about it. Nadia was deliberate about everything. She moved between the cabinet and the coffee maker like she'd mapped the exact number of steps years ago and had no interest in changing the route. I stayed near the doorframe, close enough to be in the room, far enough to give her space to decide what she wanted from this. "Black okay?" she asked, not turning around. "Black is fine." She paused, just for a half second. Then she kept going. When she set the mug on the counter, not handing it to me, just placing it within reach, I noticed her hands were still trembling. Not dramatically, just the faintest shake at her fingertips that she was working hard to ignore. I picked up the mug and wrapped both hands around it. "So," I said, "you want to tell me what that was, or are we doing the part where we pretend it was nothing?" Nadia leaned her hip against the counter and looked at me over the rim of her coffee. The kitchen light was harsher than the hallway, and up close I could see how exhausted she was, not just from tonight, but from something that had been going on a lot longer than tonight. "That was my brother," she said. "Tyler." "Okay. He wasn't going to hurt me, not physically." She said it flat, like she'd had to clarify that before, and hated that she had to. "Tyler doesn't do anything that leaves a mark. He just talks. Very calmly, very reasonably, until you start wondering if maybe he's right and you've been wrong about everything." "What does he want?" She set her mug down hard enough that coffee sloshed against the side. 3 years ago, our dad died. Car accident. He left behind a joint account money split equally between me and Tyler. Her voice stayed even, but her jaw was tight, the muscle flickering under her skin. Tyler's been managing it since then. 2 months ago, I asked to see the actual bank statements, not his summary, the real documents. And he showed up at 11 on a Thursday night instead of just sending them. He showed up at 11 on a Thursday night to explain very calmly why I was being irrational. Her eyes went sharp and fierce. "So I hired a lawyer 3 weeks ago to pull the statements directly. Tyler found out yesterday. Hence the visit. Hence the visit." She picked her mug back up and took a long drink. "Go ahead. Ask me why I didn't do it sooner." "I wasn't going to ask that." She looked at me sideways. "Most people do. Most people haven't spent years watching someone reframe reality one conversation at a time," I said. "Takes as long as it takes." Something moved across her face fast, like she was trying to catch it before it showed. Her grip on the mug tightened and she looked away toward the window, blinking hard twice. When she turned back, her chin was up. "You're very calm about all of this," she said. "I assess before I react. Occupational habit." "Is that what you were doing out there assessing?" I thought about the 19 minutes I'd spent on the hallway floor before I finally stood up. "Something like that," I said. "Why did you knock?" Her voice dropped half a register. "You could have kept working, pretended you didn't hear." "You went quiet," I said. "That kind of quiet means something." Her breath hitched just once, barely audible, and she pressed her lips together hard. Her eyes went bright at the edges. The kind of bright that happens right before someone decides they absolutely are not going to cry in front of a person they met 40 minutes ago. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough. "For knocking, and for the whole girlfriend situation." "How'd I do?" The brightness in her eyes shifted into something that was almost a smile. The honey was a nice touch. Panicked, it came out. It worked. She set her mug in the sink and straightened up arms, crossing loosely over her chest. For what it's worth, Caleb from 4A, you're a decent person. High praise. Rarer than it should be. She walked me to the door and held it open. My tools were still scattered across the hallway floor. You should finish your pipe, she said. Probably. And Caleb. She said my name like she was testing the weight of it. You didn't ask me why I didn't call someone tonight. A friend, anyone. Wasn't my question to ask. She exhaled slow and uneven like something had loosened in her chest that had been wound tight for a long time. Okay, she said quietly. Good night. Good night, Nadia. I walked back to 4A and let myself in and stood in the dark just inside my door without turning on a light. Across the hall I heard hers click shut, then quiet. I stood there longer than I should have, thinking about nothing in particular, and realized the last time I'd felt this settled inside my own head was a long time ago, long enough that I couldn't name the occasion. I went back out and finished the pipe. I didn't sleep well. Not because of the pipe. I finished that around 1 in the morning and the work was fine. It was everything else that kept me staring at the ceiling, thinking about a woman 12 feet away who held her hand steady through sheer force of will and left herself sticky notes on old coffee. I went downstairs at 8 to grab equipment from the storage room Donna let me use off the lobby. Donna Perez had managed the Greystone for 15 years. She was 55, silver-streaked hair and a tight bun, and had the specific energy of a woman who had seen every variety of human behavior this building offered and was no longer surprised by any of it. She kept fresh flowers by the entrance, a pot of coffee going in her office at all hours, and herself always behind that desk with the door open, seeing everything. Caleb. She didn't look up when I passed. Coffee's fresh. I'm good. I didn't ask if you were good. She set her papers down and looked at me over her reading glasses. Sit down. I sat. She poured 2 mugs without asking. Heard there was excitement on 4 last night? She said. Pipe replacement. I meant the other excitement. She sipped her coffee, watching me with sharp brown eyes. Tyler Cross paid his sister a visit. I wrapped my hands around the mug. You know him. I know of him. Her voice got careful the way people get when words have weight. He's been here twice before, last spring and once in August, both times after 10 at night. Both times he left without acknowledging me. She paused. I make it my business to know who comes and goes like that, especially when they move like someone who knows they shouldn't be there but figures nobody's going to say anything. Nadia never mentioned him. You know how she is. Something crossed Donna's face, not quite frustration, not quite worry, but the look people get when they care about someone who won't let them help. Handles everything herself, doesn't want to make a fuss. She set her mug down. 3 weeks ago I gave her a name, a lawyer I know who handles estate disputes. Good one, fair rates. I looked at her. That was you. I wrote a name on a piece of paper. She picked her mug back up unbothered. Same way you didn't do anything last night except happen to be in the hallway. The way she said it told me she knew exactly how long I'd been standing there before I knocked. I didn't confirm it. She didn't push. She's going to be okay, I said. I know she is. Donna said it with flat certainty like she'd already done the math. Tougher than she looks, and she looks pretty tough. She tilted her head. You looked rattled when you came back down last night. I was focused on the pipe. Mm-hmm. She reached across her desk and shuffled through a stack of mail. She keeps them, you know, she said, not looking up. I went still. What? The notes you leave, when you reroute her packages, when you flag something for the building. She pulled an envelope from the stack. Every single one, little pile in her kitchen drawer. I've seen them during quarterly checks. I opened my mouth, closed it. I had left those notes because it seemed like the right thing to do, practical, nothing more. The idea that she had kept them, all of them, sat in my chest like something I didn't have a word for yet. Donna looked up and smiled like I had just confirmed something she'd suspected for a while. I drank my coffee and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. Then the elevator groaned open. The Greystone's elevator announced itself like that cable's protesting every arrival, and Nadia walked out. Gray hoodie jeans, hair down, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone running on 4 hours of sleep. She had a set to her jaw that said she'd already decided today was going to be a functional day whether it cooperated or not. She saw me through Donna's open door and stopped walking. "Morning," I said. "Morning." Her eyes moved over my face fast, checking the air between us, I realized, seeing whether last night had made things weird. I kept my expression easy so she'd know it hadn't. "Coffee's fresh," Donna said from behind me. "Both of you look like you need it." Nadia looked at Donna, then at me, then back at Donna with the expression of someone who had just walked into a conversation about themselves and knew it immediately. "How much did you tell him?" she asked. "Nothing you wouldn't want him to know," Donna said, which was such a perfect non-answer that Nadia's mouth pressed into a flat line and she turned to the mailboxes instead. She pulled out one thin envelope, tucked it under her arm. Then she turned toward the elevator, paused with her hand on the button, and looked back at me over her shoulder. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." She held my gaze for one beat long enough that I felt it somewhere solid behind my sternum, then nodded once. Small, certain, like something had just been settled between us without either of us naming what it was. The elevator doors groaned shut behind her. Donna refilled my mug. "See?" she said. "See what? Nothing." She went back to her papers, smiling to herself. "Go fix something, Caleb." I picked up my equipment and headed for the stairs. Behind me, Donna's office was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and coffee cooling in a mug, and a building that knew more about its people than any of them realized. The knock came at 3:17 in the afternoon. I know because I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a set of blueprints a client had sent over, and I had just checked my phone for the time when the knock happened. 3 short raps, not urgent, not polite, just deliberate. The kind of knock that had already decided you were going to answer it. I opened the door, and Nadia Cross was standing in the hallway in jeans and a worn Northwestern sweatshirt, hair still damp from the shower, holding a thick manila envelope against her chest like a shield she wasn't sure was going to hold. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She looked past me into the apartment. Not nosy, just taking stock the way people do when they've lived 12 feet from a space for 2 years and are finally seeing the inside of it for the first time. Her eyes landed on the blueprints spread across my table and stayed there for a half-second longer than everything else. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back and held the door open. She walked in slowly, still holding the envelope, and stopped in the middle of the living room. My apartment was the mirror image of hers in layout, but nothing else. Bare walls, second-hand furniture tools stacked neatly in the corner, and those blueprints on the table that I should have rolled up before I answered the door but hadn't thought to. "Those yours?" she asked, nodding toward them. "Old project," I said. "You want coffee?" She shook her head. She was working up to something and we both knew it, so I didn't push. I leaned against the kitchen counter and waited. "I have a meeting," she said finally, "with my attorney, next Wednesday at 2. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. "His name is Robert Finch," Donna referred him. "He specializes in estate disputes, which is the legal term for situations where someone dies and leaves assets behind, and the people handling those assets decide the rules don't apply to them." Her jaw tightened. "He's already filed a formal request with the bank for full account statements going back 3 years. Tyler has 30 days to respond before it escalates to probate court." I nodded. Probate court was where estate disputes went when they couldn't be resolved between parties directly. A judge would review the accounts, the will, all of it. It was slow and expensive and exactly the kind of thing Tyler Cross would want to avoid. "I need someone to come with me," Nadia said. Her voice stayed even, but her knuckles had gone white around the envelope. "Not to say anything, not to do anything, just to—" She stopped, exhaled hard through her nose. "Tyler has a way of making me feel like I'm standing in a room by myself even when I'm not. I just need to know there's actually someone in my corner who I can look at when he starts doing that thing with his voice." "Is Tyler going to be at the meeting?" "Finch invited both of us," Tyler confirmed. She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were dry and fierce and just barely underneath all of that scared. "He's going to sit across the table from me and be very calm and very reasonable, and I am going to need to remember that I am not crazy." Something tightened in my chest. Not pity, nothing close to pity. Something more like recognition. "You're not crazy," I said. "I know that." The words came out fast and sharp, the same way they had the night before, then softer. "I know, I just—" She pressed her lips together. "It helps to hear it from someone who's seen him." I'll come, I said. She blinked, like she had prepared herself for more resistance than that. Just like that. You need someone in your corner. I've got Wednesday afternoon free. Caleb. She said my name with a complicated weight, equal parts gratitude and something that looked a lot like the discomfort of someone who wasn't used to accepting help without negotiating the terms first. You don't owe me anything. Last night was you already did more than... Nadia. I kept my voice easy. It's a Wednesday afternoon meeting. I'm not climbing a mountain. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Almost. The tension in her shoulders dropped by a fraction, and she looked down at the envelope again, turning it over in her hands. You'd just sit there, she asked. You wouldn't try to, I don't know, fix it. I fix pipes, I said. Lawyers fix estate disputes. I'll sit there and let Finch do his job. This time the almost laugh made it all the way out short and startled like she hadn't meant to let it. She pressed her free hand over her mouth like she was surprised it had happened, and her eyes went bright at the corners in a way that had nothing to do with crying. Okay, she said. Wednesday at 2. Wednesday at 2. She turned to go, then stopped and looked back at the blueprints on my table. Something in her expression shifted curious now, the way she got when she'd noticed something she hadn't been offered and was deciding whether to ask. What was the project? She asked. I looked at the blueprints. They were 3 years old, a mixed-use residential building I'd designed in my last semester before I left school. Clean lines, efficient use of space, the kind of thing that had taken me 4 months and had never been built and never would be. I had gotten them out this morning without fully knowing why. Something I was working on a while back, I said. Didn't go anywhere. She looked at me the way Donna had looked at me that morning, like she was filing something away for later. Okay, she said quietly. Then she held up the envelope slightly, a small acknowledging gesture. Thank you, Caleb. For Wednesday, and for... She glanced at the door toward the hallway toward last night. Everything else. Don't mention it. She left. I listened to her door click shut across the hall. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment looking at the blueprints on my table. Then I rolled them up carefully and put them back in the corner where they'd been collecting dust for 2 years. I wasn't sure why I'd taken them out in the first place. Marcus Webb knocked the way he did everything too loud, too confident, completely unbothered by the possibility that the timing might not be convenient. I brought beer, he announced when I opened the door, holding up a 6-pack of Goose Island like it was a peace offering. He was 30 years old, 6'1", wearing a jacket that cost more than my monthly grocery bill and grinning the way he'd been grinning since we were 19 and sitting next to each other in an intro architecture studio at the University of Illinois. And blueprints. Don't make that face. I'm not making a face. You're making the face. He walked in without waiting to be invited, set the beer on my counter, and dropped a rolled tube of paper on my kitchen table right on top of the spot where my own blueprints had been sitting that morning. I need a second set of eyes on the Wicker Park project. The client wants to add a mezzanine level, and I think it's structurally stupid, but I want someone who isn't being paid by them to tell me I'm right. You want me to validate a decision you've already made. I want an expert opinion. He cracked open 2 beers and handed me one. You're the best eye for a structure I've ever worked with, you know that. I took the beer. I fix pipes, Marcus. You fix pipes because you decided to fix pipes. He dropped into my couch like he lived there, which was more or less how Marcus operated everywhere. Not because that's all you're capable of, and we both know it. He popped the cap on his own beer and gestured at the rolled blueprints. Just look at it. Tell me if the load-bearing math works on the south wall. I sat down across from him and unrolled the prints. Marcus Webb was an architect, a genuinely good one, the kind whose buildings looked like someone had thought about the people who would live in them rather than just the awards it might win. He'd graduated 2 years after I left, built a small firm from scratch, and called me every few months with questions he claimed were professional, but were mostly I had come to understand his way of staying in touch without having to say that directly. I looked at the south wall calculation. It took me about 45 seconds. The mezzanine loads fine if you move the support column 18 inches east, I said. Where it is now, you're asking the beam to do too much. Marcus pointed at me. See? That. Right there. He took a long drink of beer. That's what I'm talking about. It's basic load distribution. It's 3 years of architecture school and 8 years of hands-on structural work, and you're using it to tell people their pipes are crooked. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Cal, come on, when are you going to go back and finish? There it was. It always got here eventually, and Marcus never apologized for pushing it, which I simultaneously respected and found exhausting. I run a business, I said. It pays the bills. It pays the bills great, and it's not what you want to be doing at 40. He looked at me steadily. Your dad's been gone 4 years. You went home to take care of him. You did that, and you did it right. Nobody's saying you made the wrong call. But he's gone, Cal, and you're still... He gestured at the apartment. Here, doing the same thing. Not because you have to anymore. My jaw tightened. It's not that simple. I know it's not simple. I'm not saying it's simple. He sat back. I'm saying you keep the blueprints out where you can see them. I'm saying every time I bring you a structural problem, you solve it in under a minute. I'm saying you know exactly what you want, and you've been standing outside it for 4 years waiting for I don't know what you're waiting for. I drank my beer and didn't answer because the honest answer was that I didn't know either. And saying that out loud to Marcus Webb at 7 on a Friday night felt like more than I was ready for. Then my phone buzzed on the table between us. We both looked at it. The screen showed a name Nadia and a message preview. Is your light still on? Marcus looked at my phone, then at me, then back at my phone with the slow, delighted expression of someone who had just been handed information he intended to use. Who, he said, is Nadia? Neighbor. Uh-huh. He was already grinning. Neighbor, you're texting at 7 on a Friday. She texted me. Even better. He leaned forward. How long? It's not, I picked up my phone. It's not like that. Your ears just went red, Caleb. They didn't. They absolutely did. He pointed at my face with his beer bottle. I have known you for 9 years. Your ears go red when you're lying about something you actually care about. I typed back, yeah, still on. You okay? The reply came in under 30 seconds. Not really. But I will be. Sorry to bother you. I stared at that for a moment. The sorry to bother you landed somewhere uncomfortable, the specific phrasing of someone who had been made to feel like their needs were an inconvenience often enough that apologizing for them had become automatic. I stood up. I'll be right back, I told Marcus. He looked at the 2 remaining beers on the counter and the blueprints on the table and then back at me. Sure you will, he said, not unkindly. I grabbed the 2 beers from the counter and walked out my door. 12 feet. I knocked on 4B3 light wraps, nothing urgent. A moment passed. Then the door opened and Nadia stood there in the same Northwestern sweatshirt from earlier, and her eyes were red at the rims in a way that told me she had been crying recently and had stopped about 10 minutes ago and was hoping it didn't show. It showed. You didn't have to, she started. I had 2 extra beers and a friend who was starting to ask too many questions, I said. You're doing me a favor. Something cracked open in her expression, not all the way, just enough. Her chin wobbled once before she got it back under control and she stepped back to let me in. Tyler called, she said, her voice rough at the edges. He knows about Wednesday. He called 20 minutes ago, Nadia said, walking back toward her kitchen with her arms crossed tight over her chest. Very calm, very reasonable. He said he just wanted to let me know he'd be there Wednesday, and that he hoped I'd thought carefully about what I was doing to this family. She said the last 4 words with a flatness that made them land harder than anger would have. I set the 2 beers on her counter. What did you say? I said thank you for letting me know and hung up. She stopped at the counter and pressed both palms flat against it, staring at the cabinet above the sink. Then I sat on my bathroom floor for 15 minutes because that's apparently where I process things now. She laughed, short, humorless, the kind that comes out when crying feels too exhausting. Very dignified. Bathroom floor's underrated, I said. Good acoustics. She turned and looked at me with an expression that was so caught between wanting to laugh and wanting to fall apart that I could see both things happening at once behind her eyes. Why are you like this? She said. Like what? Normal. About all of this. She pushed off the counter and pulled open the kitchen drawer to her left, the one nearest the stove, reaching in for what I assumed was a bottle opener. Her hand stopped. I watched her go very still. Nadia. She didn't answer. She reached into the drawer slowly and pulled out a small square of paper. White. Folded once. She stared at it for a moment, then set it on the counter and reached back into the drawer and pulled out another one. Then another. She lined them up on the counter one by one, and I felt something drop in my stomach when I recognized them. My handwriting. All of them. my handwriting on small squares of paper that I had folded and left outside her door or on her mailbox over the past 2 years without thinking twice about any of them. She pulled out 7 in total, laid them out in a row on her kitchen counter like she was reading evidence. Her hands had started shaking again, not the controlled tremor from Thursday night, something rawer than that. "Nadia," I started. "Hold on." Her voice came out unsteady. She picked up the first one and read it aloud, her voice cracking on the second word. "Your package 4A. She set it down and picked up the next. "Hallway lights out on your side. Put in a request with Donna. 4A. Her throat worked. "Heard your smoke alarm. Left a battery by your door just in case. 4A. She stopped, put the note down carefully, pressed her fingertips against the edge of the counter. "Coffee order from downstairs. They mixed up the rooms again. Still black, no sugar. 4A. She set that one down too. Her shoulders had pulled up around her ears and her jaw was trembling, that specific trembling of someone fighting with everything they have against something that is going to win anyway. "I kept all of them," she said, her voice barely making it out. I didn't do it on purpose. I just kept putting them in this drawer and I never asked myself why." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her eyes had gone glassy and bright and full. "Nobody has ever—" Her voice broke completely on the last word and she stopped. Then she cried. Not quietly, not the controlled, careful kind. Her whole face crumpled, and the sound that came out of her was the kind that happens when something that has been held together by sheer determination finally lets go. Her shoulders shook and she bent forward over the counter and pressed both hands over her face and just came apart. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. I didn't touch her, didn't reach for her, just moved close enough that she knew I was there and said her name quietly. "Nadia." She turned, and because I was right there and there was nowhere else to go, she put her face against my shoulder and kept crying, and I wrapped one arm around her carefully and let her. She smelled like clean laundry and whatever shampoo she used, and underneath that, the specific exhaustion of a person who had been carrying something alone for 3 years and had just in the middle of her kitchen on a Friday night finally put it down. "I'm sorry," she said against my shoulder, muffled and wrecked. I'm not usually—" "You don't have to be anything right now," I said. She cried for another minute, maybe 2. Then she pulled back and wiped her face hard with both hands and took a breath that shuddered all the way in and came back out steadier. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked at me with the particular raw openness of someone who has just been seen doing something they usually do alone. "Nobody does stuff like that," she said, gesturing at the notes on the counter. "Just quietly, without making it a thing. It wasn't a big deal. It was to me." She picked up the battery note and held it carefully. "I work night shifts, Caleb. I come home at 7 in the morning when the whole building is asleep, and I let myself into a dark apartment, and I am very good at telling myself that I'm fine with that." She looked up at me. These made me feel like someone knew I was there, even when they weren't trying to. Something shifted in my chest, something I had been deliberately not paying attention to for 2 days, maybe longer than that. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, now direct. "Long enough to know your coffee order," I said. "Long enough to notice when your lights don't go off at the right time." Her breath caught. Just once. "That's not nothing, Caleb." "No," I said. "It's not." She looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I felt it everywhere, and then she reached up and pressed her palm flat against my chest just for a second, just long enough to feel my heartbeat through my shirt. Then she dropped her hand and looked back at the notes lined up on her counter. "Stay," she said quietly. "Just for a little while. I don't want to be in this apartment alone tonight." "Okay," I said. She handed me a beer. I opened both of them. We moved to the couch, and outside the Chicago winter pressed against the windows, and for the first time in a long time, neither of us was pretending to be fine. We sat on her couch with the beers going warm and the city doing its Friday night thing outside sirens, 2 blocks over someone's music from the floor below the Greystone's radiator knocking in the wall like it had a complaint to file. Nadia had her feet tucked under her hands, wrapped around her bottle eyes, drifting back to the 7 notes still lined up on her kitchen counter. The red around her eyes had faded to pink. Her breathing had evened out. "Tell me about the blueprints," she said. "You don't have to redirect to me because you're embarrassed." Her chin came up. "I'm not embarrassed. I'm asking because you looked at them the same way I look at my dad's watch. Like it belongs to you but costs something to hold." I turned the bottle in my hands. I was in architecture school, I said. 3rd year. My dad got sick. Parkinson's. Moves slow at first and then it doesn't. I paused. There was nobody else, so I came home. And never went back. No. She watched me with the careful attention of someone who understood the weight of a sentence that ends without explanation. Why not? After he passed. That's what Marcus asked tonight. I set my beer on the table. Honest answer. Going back means admitting I actually want it, and wanting something that much means you can lose it. My throat tightened. I already know what that feels like. The radiator knocked. Outside, the music shifted to something slower. Tyler used to tell me I was too emotional to handle money, Nadia said quietly. Said it so many times so reasonably that I spent 2 years believing him. She looked down at her bottle. You know what finally snapped me out of it? What? I realized I'd been handling my own finances just fine. Rent, student loans, my car, all on a nurse's salary, not one missed payment. Her voice went fierce and tight. The only money I supposedly couldn't handle was the money Tyler was controlling. Funny how that works. It's not funny at all, I said. No, it really isn't. She looked at me steadily. Don't let fear of losing something stop you from building it, Caleb. That's just letting fear win in a different room. That landed somewhere solid in my chest. I sat with it for a moment. Your dad, she said softer now. What was he like? Nobody had asked me that in a long time, not in a way that made me want to answer. Stubborn, I said. Had strong opinions about load-bearing walls. He was a contractor, taught me everything about structure. Used to say the difference between a good building and a great one is whether the designer thought about the people who'd live inside it. Nadia smiled fully, tiredly, genuinely. He sounds like someone who'd have been annoyed you stopped. He told me twice to go back. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. Toward the end, I told him I would. She looked at me and didn't say anything that wasn't necessary. You still can, she said simply. Marcus says the same thing. Marcus is right. She tilted her head. You got the blueprints out this morning. First time in how long? 8 months. Something warm moved across her face. That's not nothing, she said quietly. My own words back to me. I looked at her. Feet tucked under her beer-forgotten eyes, still faintly pink and more unguarded than I had ever seen her. Something had loosened between us tonight. Not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily the way a window lets in air when you stop holding it shut. Nadia, I said. Yeah. I'm glad you texted. Her breath came out uneven. Just once. She looked down, then back up, and her expression was open in a way that clearly cost her something. Me too, she said. I'm glad you knocked. Thursday and tonight. A beat. I'm glad you keep knocking. I stood up before I did something I hadn't thought through carefully enough. Get some sleep, I said. You need to walk into that meeting Wednesday like you own the room. I do own the room, she said immediately. I know. Make sure Tyler knows it. She walked me to the door. In the hallway, yellow-lit and quiet, she leaned against the frame and looked at me with a small, tired smile. Good night, Caleb from 4A. Good night, Nadia from 4B. Back in my apartment, Marcus was asleep on the couch, blueprints still spread across the table. I stood over them in the quiet. Then I sat down, picked up a pencil, and made a correction on the south wall that had been bothering me for 3 years. It was a small thing. But it was the first honest thing I'd done in a long time. My phone rang at 7:14 in the morning. Not a number I recognized, Chicago area code, but nothing saved. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. Is this the man who's been filling my daughter's head with ideas? The voice was measured unhurried with the particular precision of someone who had chosen every word before dialing. A woman. Older. This is Simone Cross, Nadia's mother. I sat up in bed and rubbed my face with one hand. Yes, ma'am. I'm Caleb Roman. I live across the hall from Nadia. I know who you are. A pause, weighted and deliberate. Tyler told me about you. He said you've been encouraging Nadia to take legal action against her own brother, against her own family. I kept my voice even. With respect, Mrs. Cross, I don't think that's an accurate description of what's happening. Tyler says you've been influencing her, that she wouldn't be doing any of this if it weren't for you. Her voice stayed composed, but underneath the composure was something tight and frightened, a mother who had been handed a story and was holding it hard because the alternative was worse. Nadia has always been headstrong, but she's never gone after Tyler like this, not until you came along. Mrs. Cross, she's tearing this family apart. Her voice cracked on the last word just once before she pulled it back. Her father has been gone 3 years and we are still trying to hold ourselves together, and now she wants to drag Tyler into court over money. Over money when what we should be doing is taking care of each other. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, West Addison was doing its gray Wednesday morning thing, garbage truck grinding down the block. A woman walking a dog in a puffy coat, the city indifferent and ongoing. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You may." "When's the last time you saw Nadia's bank statements, not Tyler's summary of them? The actual documents with her name on them?" Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone who has just registered that a question has a shape they weren't expecting. "Tyler handles the finances," she said carefully. "I understand that. I'm asking whether you've personally seen the account statements, the ones that show every transaction, every withdrawal going back 3 years. Another silence. Longer this time. "Tyler keeps me informed," she said, but the precision in her voice had developed a crack down the middle, thin and new. "I'm sure he does," I said. "I'm asking about the documents themselves." The line went quiet for long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When Simone spoke again, her voice had changed, still controlled, but the certainty had gone out of it like air from a slow leak. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because I think if you saw them you'd understand why Nadia hired a lawyer," I said. "And I think Tyler knows that, which is why you're getting his version and not hers." The silence this time was different, heavier. I could hear her breathing, careful, measured, the breath of a woman recalibrating something fundamental. "I need to go," she said finally. "Mrs. Cross." I kept my voice quiet. "Nadia isn't tearing this family apart. She's trying to find out what happened to money her father left for both of them. That's not headstrong. That's her right." The line went dead. I stood at the window for a moment, phone in hand, looking at nothing in particular. Then I went to make coffee. At 11:30, a knock at my door, 3 short raps, Nadia's knock. She was in scrubs, still on the tail end of her night shift, hair pulled back, the particular gray exhaustion of 7 hours in a pediatric ward sitting across her shoulders like a coat she couldn't take off. "I just got off," she said. "I need 2 hours of sleep before we leave for Finch's office. Can you—" She stopped, looked at my face. "What happened?" "Your mother called me this morning." Every trace of exhaustion on Nadia's face sharpened instantly into something else. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went wide and hot, and she grabbed the doorframe with one hand like she needed it for ballast. "She called you," she repeated. "Tyler gave her your number and she called you." "Yes." "What did she say?" Her voice came out wound tight, vibrating at the edges. "That I've been influencing you. That you wouldn't be doing this without me." I watched her face carefully. "She's scared, Nadia. Tyler gave her a story and she believed it because believing it is easier than the alternative. The alternative being that her son has been stealing from both of us." The words came out flat and precise and devastating. Her eyes filled not with sadness, with fury, the kind that comes from a specific and personal betrayal. "He used my mother, Caleb. He called her and wound her up and sent her at you because he knows I won't back down and he's running out of moves." "I know. What did you say to her?" Her grip on the doorframe tightened, knuckles going pale. "I asked her when she last saw the actual bank statements." Nadia stared at me. Just that. Something moved across her face, complicated, and fast relief and grief tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. Her chin trembled once before she locked it down. "Did she answer?" "No," I said. "But she will." Nadia pressed her lips together hard and looked at the floor for a moment, breathing through whatever was moving through her. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and her face went through 3 expressions in quick succession: shock, then something raw and wounded, then a fierce and fragile hope she was clearly trying not to trust yet. She turned the screen toward me. "A text from Simone Cross sent 4 minutes ago. I need to see the statements myself. Can we talk tonight?" Nadia looked at me. Her eyes were bright and full, and her hands were shaking around the phone. "Go sleep," I said quietly. 2 hours. I'll knock at 1:30. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she turned and went into 4B and closed the door behind her. I went back to my coffee and sat at the table with the blueprints and waited. I knocked at 1:30 exactly. Nadia opened the door in dark slacks and a gray blazer, hair pinned back, and the particular expression of someone who had slept 2 hours and woken up ready for a fight. She looked like herself, only more concentrated, like someone had turned up the contrast on everything that made her Nadia Cross. "You look like you're about to walk into a deposition," I said. "Good." She picked up her bag from the couch. "That's exactly what I'm going for." Robert Finch's office was on the 14th floor of a building on South Wacker Drive, all glass and pale wood, the kind of space designed to make clients feel like their problems were being handled by people who knew what they were doing. Finch himself was 60, compact, with the unhurried manner of a man who had seen every variety of family financial dispute and was no longer surprised by any of them. He shook Nadia's hand first, then mine, and gestured us toward the conference table without ceremony. Tyler was already there. He looked exactly as I remembered expensive watch business casual, the specific posture of a man who considered every room he entered his by default. He looked at Nadia when she walked in. Then he looked at me with the measured assessment of someone recalculating a situation. "Nadia," he said, smooth, warm, practiced. "Tyler." She sat down across from him without hesitating, set her bag on the table, and folded her hands in front of her. Her jaw was set and her shoulders were square, and she looked at her brother with the clear, steady eyes of someone who had stopped second-guessing herself. I sat beside her and said nothing, which was exactly what I was there to do. Finch laid out the situation with the efficient precision of someone billing by the hour. The joint account their father had established held significantly more than Tyler's quarterly summaries to Nadia had indicated. 3 years of statements showed a pattern of withdrawals substantial, consistent, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic bank notification, that did not correspond to any shared expense Finch could identify. Tyler had 48 hours to provide documentation accounting for every withdrawal, or the matter would proceed to probate court, where a judge would make the accounting decisions for him. Tyler's jaw tightened once. Otherwise, he didn't move. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, his voice perfectly level. "I've been managing complex family finances under significant emotional stress since Dad died. There are explanations for every transaction." "Then providing the documentation should be straightforward," Finch said pleasantly. Tyler looked at Nadia. "You're really doing this?" "I already did it," she said. "This is just the part where you find out." Something flickered behind Tyler's eyes. Not guilt, not remorse. Something colder than either. He looked at me. "Does she know you're only here because you feel guilty about something? People like you always need a cause, Roman." "Tyler." Nadia's voice came out sharp and clear. "Look at me. Not him. Me." She leaned forward slightly. "Whatever you say to him, whatever story you told Mom, whatever you're about to say right now, none of it changes what's in those statements. And we both know what's in those statements." Tyler's composure cracked just for a second, just enough. His mouth thinned and his eyes went flat, and he looked at his sister with something that might have been the beginning of shame if it had anywhere to go. It didn't seem to have anywhere to go. He left without signing anything, which Finch said was entirely expected and not a problem. We rode the elevator down in the specific quiet of two people who had just been through something and needed a moment before they decided what to do with it. Outside on South Wacker, the afternoon had gone gray and cold wind off the lake cutting through everything. "You okay?" I asked. "My hands are shaking," she said, holding them out in front of her. They were visibly, uncontrollably the adrenaline of 2 hours of held composure looking for somewhere to go. That happens when I stop performing and start feeling. My body sends me a bill. That's an efficient system. It's terrible, actually. She laughed, sudden and real and slightly wrecked around the edges. "I did it, though. I looked right at him and I didn't flinch." "You didn't flinch once." She turned to face me on the sidewalk, cheeks red from the cold eyes bright. "Thank you for being there," she said. "You didn't say a word and it was exactly right." We took the L back north. By the time we got to the Greystone, it was past 4 and the building was doing its late afternoon thing, Donna watering her lobby flowers. Someone's cooking smell drifting from the second floor. the elevator groaning its standard protest. Upstairs, Nadia stopped at her door and looked at her phone. Her face changed. "She called," she said. "My mom, twice while we were on the train." Her voice dropped. "And she texted Finch's office directly, asked for copies of the statements." Something loosened in my chest. "She's looking for herself." "Yeah." Nadia stared at her phone screen, and her expression did something complicated and painful, the specific grief of someone whose family is breaking apart and coming back together at the same time, and both things hurt equally. Her eyes filled. "I didn't expect her to move that fast." "Call her back," I said. "I'll be right here." She looked up at me. "You don't have to wait." "I know." I leaned against the wall beside my door. "Call her." Nadia nodded, once stepped into 4B and left the door open. I stayed in the hallway. I could hear her voice low, careful, then breaking open on a word I couldn't make out, then her mother's voice on the other end, and then Nadia crying. Not the controlled kind. The other kind, deep and painful and relieved and devastated all at once, the sound of someone whose mother had finally, after 3 years, chosen her. I stayed in the hallway and listened to the building breathe around me and didn't move. 20 minutes later, Nadia appeared in her doorway. Her face was blotched and wet, and she looked completely wrung out and more at peace than I had ever seen her. "She believed me," she said, her voice rough and wrecked and wondering. "She said she should have asked sooner. She said—" She stopped, pressed her hand flat over her mouth for a moment. "She said she's sorry." Her chin wobbled and her eyes filled again, and she crossed the hallway in 3 steps and put her arms around me and held on. I wrapped both arms around her and held her back solid and steady while she shook. "You did that," I said quietly. "Not me, you." "I know," she said against my shoulder. "But you stayed." She pulled back just enough to look at me, hands still gripping my jacket, face still wet. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to not be calm about it." My heart knocked hard. "Okay?" I kept those notes because every time I found one, I felt less alone. Her chin trembled. "Not because you were a good neighbor, because it was you." She looked up, eyes fierce and terrified. "I don't want to be your neighbor anymore, Caleb." The hallway went completely still. "I stood outside your door for 19 minutes that night," I said. "Not because I didn't know what to do, because I needed it to be you on the other side." Her breath rushed out. 2 tears ran straight down her face, and she let them. Then I kissed her. Right there. Ugly carpet-broken radiator, someone's smoke alarm going off 1 floor below. Exactly right, anyway. 3 weeks later, I was on my back in the hallway outside 4A and 4B, replacing the same section of baseboard pipe I had started on the night all of this began. Donna had called that morning with the same tone she always used when something was about to flood. Same tools spread across the same stretch of ugly hallway carpet, same flashlight. Same particular quiet that comes from a job your hands know how to do without being told. The stain near the stairwell hadn't moved. The building was still itself. Everything else was different. The probate court filing had gone through 10 days ago. Tyler had provided documentation for exactly none of the withdrawals Finch had flagged, which meant a judge would be making the accounting decisions instead. Finch said Nadia's position was strong. She had nodded, thanked him, and walked out of his office with her shoulders down for the first time since I'd known her. Simone had driven up from Naperville the weekend after the meeting and stayed 2 days. When I passed Nadia Sunday evening, she looked like someone who had come through a storm still standing. She said simply, "She stayed the whole weekend," and I said good, and that was everything that needed saying. Marcus had called twice. The second time, I told him I had submitted my re-enrollment application to the University of Illinois part-time evening program, 2 years to finish the degree. He went so quiet I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Finally, Cal," like he'd been holding those 2 words for 9 years. I was thinking about that when I heard the elevator. Nadia's footsteps came down the hall, quick and deliberate, the walk of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She stopped when she saw me. "Donna called," she said. "Donna called." She looked at my tools, then at me flat on my back in my work jacket, then back at the tools with an expression that was trying very hard not to smile. "This is exactly how we met. Pipes don't care about narrative symmetry." She laughed full and easy, the kind that didn't surprise her anymore when it came out. She was in jeans and her Northwestern sweatshirt hair down a paper bag in one hand, smelling like the Thai place on Addison. She sat down on the hallway floor across from me, back against 4B bag in her lap, like sitting on ugly carpet outside her apartment was a completely reasonable thing to do. "Finch called today," she said. "Tyler's lawyer reached out. He wants to settle before the full hearing. How do you feel?" She checked honestly, the way she always did. Like someone who's been running for 3 years and just realized it stopped chasing her. A pause. "And hungry, mostly hungry. You brought Thai food to a plumbing repair." "I brought Thai food to my boyfriend who happens to be doing a plumbing repair." She held up the bag. "There's a difference." The word boyfriend landed somewhere warm and solid in my chest. 3 weeks in, and it still did that. I suspected it would keep doing that for a long time, and I had stopped pretending that was a problem. "I have a pipe to finish," I said. "It'll keep." She tilted her head. "You submitted the application. Yesterday morning." Her face broke open, that full, unguarded smile I had seen exactly twice before, and that still knocked the air out of me. Her eyes went bright, and she pointed at me with the paper bag. "I knew you were going to do it," she said, her voice rough at the edges. "I knew it the night you told me about your dad. Something shifted in you right there on my couch. You told me fear winning in a different room was still fear winning. I'm very wise. You're extremely wise." "And I brought pad thai." She stood up and held out her free hand. "Come on, the pipe will still be broken in an hour." I looked at the half-finished pipe, then at her hand. Then I set down my wrench and took it, and she pulled me to my feet and didn't let go, and we stood in the hallway in the yellow light, close enough that I could see exactly when she decided to stop waiting. She kissed me first. Brief, warm, certain, the kind of kiss that didn't need to be anything more than what it was, because what it was already enough. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "Black coffee, no sugar," she said. "What? That's how I knew." She looked up at me. "When you knew my order without asking, that's when I knew you'd been paying attention." She squeezed my hand once. "Come eat dinner with me, Caleb." "Yeah," I said. "Okay." Down in the lobby, Donna Perez looked up at the ceiling, smiled to herself, and went back to her crossword. She had known since the beginning. She always did. There's a version of this story where I walk past apartment 4B that Thursday night and mind my own business. Finish the pipe, pack my tools, go to bed. The sensible thing, the practical thing. But here's what fixing broken things for a living teaches you: the moment you decide something isn't your problem is usually the moment it needed you most. Not to fix it. Not to take over, just to knock. Nadia didn't need saving. She had already hired the lawyer. She had already decided she deserved better. All she needed was someone to show up. And all I needed was her to remind me that letting fear of losing something stop you from building it is just fear winning in a different room. The notes I left were nothing. 30 seconds each, no name, just a number. I never thought twice about any of them, but she kept every single one. Not because they were significant, because they were consistent, because someone had looked up long enough to notice she was there. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the hallway with a wrench and stays. If this story hit close to home, tell me about it in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear that showing up quietly is enough, share this with them. It might be exactly what they needed today. New stories every week. Don't miss the next one.